There's a question, or maybe more like a comment. The problem with these Indian teachers like Sadghuru and Deepak Chopra, they give you the first step to the kingdom, which is to disidentify from the body, the emotions, and the mind, and realize that you are beyond these lower bodies and you are pure consciousness, the conscious you. But it ends there. How did this consciousness come about, and where is it going? They can't answer that. So even though they can help people who are still strongly identified with their lower bodies to rise to the next level, the student eventually should outgrow these teachers and move on to the next level and the next teacher to have these fundamental questions answered. And I think that's an interesting way to look at it. I hadn't personally really thought about it before, but and it's basically the law that the Ascended Masters say, that it's an outcome of the law of free will. And the saying is, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And what it really means is that when the student is ready for a higher teaching, the teacher will appear that can take the student to a higher level. Now the problem here is that it's one thing to be ready at what we might call inner levels, and it's another thing to be ready or willing at the conscious level. So I have talked about in several videos about the concept that we have a life plan or divine plan that we make before we come into this embodiment. And part of that plan is the growth we want to go through. And as a result of that, we might have in our life plan that we're meant to find a certain spiritual teaching at a certain time. And then we follow that for a time, and then we find a higher teaching. That's very common for us, that we have this more than one teaching. But what can happen is that when you find the first spiritual teaching, your outer mind becomes attached to it. And you might come to believe in some statements made that, oh, this guru is the highest guru, he's enlightened, this is the highest possible teaching, so you don't need anything else. You might also become involved with a spiritual organization, a spiritual community where you make friends, and you become attached to these friends. And you know that if you leave and go to another teaching, they won't be friends with you anymore. You will lose them. And so this is also what can happen. So what happens to a lot of people is that your first spiritual movement becomes your last. And this is basically what your ego and dark forces want. They would prefer that they could stop you from taking a step up on the spiritual path. But they are always, wherever you are at, they're always trying to make it so that the last step you have taken becomes the last step you will ever take. And one of the most common ways is, as I said, people get attached to an outer teacher organization. So as I say in several of my breakthrough videos, you really need to be loyal to your personal path, whatever that means, and you will only know that intuitively. So, you know, another thing that comes into the picture here is that the biggest downfall or pitfall on the spiritual path is this desire to be special, to feel that you are special compared to others. And there are many gurus out there and organizations out there that cater to that desire, because they have these statements or ideas in there that this guru is enlightened, he's the ultimate guru, or this teaching is the ultimate teaching. And the implication, of course, is that since you have found this teaching, you must be one of the most advanced spiritual students, otherwise you wouldn't have found the teaching. And of course, if you have the highest teaching, where can you go? I mean, what could be higher than the highest, right? So this can become a trap for people, and I personally experienced that both in the Transcendental Meditation movement, which had this culture that this was the highest form of meditation, this was the highest teaching that the Maharishi had given, and also in my second spiritual movement, the Summit Lighthouse, which stated that we have the highest spiritual teaching on the planet because it comes directly from the Ascended Masters. And so, there's two things that can come into play here that it's important to contemplate. And now the question or the comment talks about these Indian teachers. And one of the characteristics of Indian teachings is that it's based on this guru tradition. And it's also based on the Vedas. And it's believed by many, certainly that was what was projected in TM, that the Vedas were given, I don't know, thousands of years ago. Some say 3,000, some are maybe even older than that. And they were given by these rishis, which means seer, who received the teachings from some higher realm. And this was a purer time than it is today. So the revelation they received was the highest possible, the purest form of revelation that they were given. So what I'm saying is that you have this idea that the Vedas were the ultimate spiritual teaching, and we're just sort of interpreting them later. Then you also have the guru tradition, where the guru who's here now is always looking to his guru, and he was looking to his guru, and then it goes back in time. And supposedly, maybe there was some guru originally that was the ultimate guru, that was the purest form of guru. So what I'm saying is that there is this tendency, in as far as I have picked up from Indian teachings, to look backwards. Buddhism looks back to the Buddha. The Buddha was the ultimately enlightened being. The Buddha said that we all have the potential to reach enlightenment, but nobody's really done it since the Buddha. So he was the ultimate authority, or still is the ultimate authority for many Buddhists. So there's always this tendency to look backwards. And I don't know that I consciously made a decision to this. I think I was probably had acquired this understanding in past lives, but I never could understand this looking backwards. Why are you looking to something in the past? And because it was obvious to me that the world has progressed compared to 3,000 or 5,000 years ago. And so the way I understand this today is, of course, that the entire world is in this upward process where the collective consciousness of humankind is being gradually raised. And this is happening because there are individuals who are focusing on walking the spiritual path and raising their individual consciousness. And these people are using the teaching that was given in the past to raise their consciousness. And it's perfectly legitimate. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the teaching that was given in the past. But as the collective consciousness is raised, it was always logical to me that this means we can now receive a higher teaching than what could be given in the past. So this whole idea that the past was some idyllic Edenic state where humankind was able to receive the highest teaching possible, that has never appealed to me. It absolutely did not appeal to me. Because it's clear to me that based on what we know today, partly because of science, we can receive a higher understanding of the world than we could 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. That was always obvious to me. So I could never understand this looking backwards. And so as a part of this, we all have, even in Indian teachings, they have the concept of these yugas, these ages. So there was the age of Aries, and then 2,000 years ago we started the age of Pisces, and now we are in the Aquarian age. And to me, these are not just circular movements. It was always obvious to me that there's a progression. It's yes, there, from a certain viewpoint, if you're looking from up, looking down on a spiral, it seems to be going in a circle. But if you are looking at it from the side, you see that the circular movement goes upwards and forms a spiral. And it was always obvious to me that the planet is in a spiraling upwards movement. And so it's clear that the Vedas were given perhaps for the Aryan age. Jesus gave teachings and the Buddha gave teachings for the Piscean age, and now we are in the Aquarian age, we need a higher teaching. It doesn't mean that the old teachings become obsolete, because when you look at humankind, you can see that people are at many different levels of consciousness. So there are still people who are in a level of consciousness where they can benefit from an older teaching. I'm not saying that. But if you are among the spiritual people who are tuned into the growth process that's happening, do you really want to continue to study and interpret and reinterpret an older teaching, or do you want to find a newer teaching? And so I think the comment makes a good point that these Indian teachers that can help people take the first step to disidentify from the body, the emotions, and the mind, and realize that you're beyond these lower bodies, that you are pure consciousness. But I think, the way I look at it is that there's a level beyond that. Because, and this is what I've talked about in many of my non-duality videos, that really is the problem with Eastern teachings that I see, is that, it's also like the comment says, what's the purpose for the whole existence? And I remember, as I've said before, that when I was in Transcendental Meditation, I took this teacher training course, and the last month we had these Vedic teachings and practiced some Vedic meditations. And they were also talking about these enormous cycles of billions of years. And I came out of this being completely depressed because it seemed like everything is just going around in a circle. And you have all of these thousands upon thousands of embodiments, and then you just disappear back into nothingness. And I just intuitively knew it was wrong, but I couldn't in my outer mind really deal with it. And I have later come to realize it because there is an ongoing cycle. It's not a circular movement. There's an upward spiral of raising awareness, and that's what I was tuned into. And so, so we can say that, as at the lower levels of the process, you have people who are completely identified with their physical bodies. And in order to really step onto the spiritual path, you have to come to disidentify from the body, from the emotions, the thoughts, even from the outer mind. I have explained it in several of my videos that in the spiritual realm, we have our higher self. And the higher self can't take embodiment in its fullness. So it sends an extension of itself, which is what I call the conscious you, which is pure awareness. It doesn't have any specific personality. But in order to descend into embodiment, the conscious you has to create and take on these four lower bodies: the identity, the mental, the emotional, and the physical. And for a time, I've given this analogy of a reality simulator. For a time, we are meant to identify with these physical bodies. This is what I call the immersion experience in the reality simulator. But the other experience we can have is the awakening experience. And that means we now disidentify ourselves from these four lower bodies and come to realize we are not that. We are not just human beings who are here to live basically like animals and then die. So what are we here for? Well, that's what I explained in my video about how the world was created. We are co-creators. We are co-creators with ultimately the Creator, but also with the spiritual beings in the realm above us. So when we become more conscious of who we are, in other words, the first step on the path is to disidentify from the four lower bodies. We are not these bodies. We have just taken them on as a vehicle for interacting here in the material world. But what's our purpose for taking this on? What's our purpose for coming here? It is to be co-creators, to help raise the world to a higher level. And so that, to me, is the next step when you disidentify from the outer bodies. And then, of course, you can have the other step that's that ultimately your goal is to ascend and become an ascended master in the spiritual realm. And so this is one thing. You have the progression of the collective consciousness where we can step up to a higher role. We see ourselves as co-creators who are here to raise the Earth from being an unnatural planet, as I explained in several videos, to being a natural planet. But then what I also see as the lack in Eastern teachings, and for that matter many Western teachings, is that it's believed that the rishis who received the Vedas, they received them from somewhere. But they're not really clear on where it was. You have all these gods in the Hindu religion, a multiplicity of gods. And to me, part of the whole progression of the ages is that when you go back in time, they had less of an awareness of where revelation was coming from. But today, we are meant to have more awareness. And that means we have more awareness of the spiritual realm, more direct contact with the spiritual realm. And when we become aware of the spiritual realm, what do we see? Well, as I explained in my video about how the world was created, we see that the material world we're in was actually created or co-created by spiritual beings in a higher realm, namely what I call ascended masters. They have been called other things throughout the ages. So what you can basically say is that you go back in time, as I've explained also, there was a law that the ascended masters couldn't appear publicly. They couldn't present themselves publicly. They were only in certain spiritual secret organizations that they were given the awareness that they were ascended beings beyond the physical realm. But now in today's age, that law has been changed so that they are able to give public teachings. So to me, and this is, I think I acquired this in the past life probably, and I see many spiritual people at the same level. And the next logical step is that beyond these old teachings, we realize that we have spiritual teachers in a higher realm that not only can, but also are willing to give us teachings today, to give us teachings that are specifically adapted to the level of the collective consciousness, what people know. So obviously, it's the same thing as I've had discussions with fundamentalist Christians who believe that if Jesus were to appear on earth today, he would have to say exactly the same he said 2,000 years ago, because he was the Son of God, so his teaching was perfect. But what did people know about the world, about the universe 2,000 years ago? A whole lot less than we know today. So isn't it, it's perfectly logical to me that if Jesus appeared on earth today, he could tell us much more than he could do back then, partly because of science, but in very much because we know more about human psychology today than they did 2,000 years ago. I don't think they even had the concept of the psyche and what the psyche really was and is. Now, I'm not saying we have the highest concept today, but we certainly know more about it. So it's logical to me that the spiritual beings who gave the Vedas in the past and inspired the Buddha and inspired Jesus, they are still here with us today, and they can give us a higher teaching that is adapted to what we know, but also where the planet is at in these cycles of the Aquarian Age, moving into the Aquarian Age. And to me, that's what is missing from Eastern teachings, that's what's missing from the modern non-duality teachings, and many spiritual teachings, many even contemporary Western teachings. They're missing the Ascended Masters. And I have talked about why in my non-duality videos, but I'll give just a quick summary here. The basic problem in the reality simulator, that the basic feature that creates the immersion experience, is that we think our minds are self-contained systems. We can define how the universe should work. You look at many of these religions, like Christianity, you look at scientific materialism, you look at Marxism, many philosophies and ideologies, it's the human mind trying to define how the universe should work. I talk about this in one of my videos about how the mind can deceive itself, and several other videos. So the mind can become a closed system. And that's what happens when we go into this immersion experience. So the awakening experience is by realizing that the mind has limitations and that we can't get out of the closed system from within the closed system. We need to contact a reality outside of our own minds and outside the collective mind. And that reality is the Ascended Masters. What is above us is the Ascended Masters. They are the ones who are assigned to help us escape the prison of our own minds. So you look at a spiritual teaching, if it doesn't talk about some reality, some beings beyond our own minds, beyond the material world, and if it doesn't talk about having direct contact with that, it's just another teaching that was created inside the mind, inside the separate mind. And that's why, to me, the teaching that I've always been ready for always wanted, is something that's beyond what the human mind can produce, beyond these human idiosyncrasies, and comes from a clearly higher level. And so, as the commenter says, many of the teachings that are out there are valid enough. They can take you to a certain level of the path, but they can't take you beyond unless they contain something that comes from the ascended level. Whether you call them ascended masters or something else, but it has to be something that doesn't come from the human mind itself, and something that comes from the ascended level today, not 5,000 years ago. So I think that's a very good observation that's stated in the comment. And to me, the obvious answer to it is that people need to use their intuition to sense, have I followed a spiritual teaching long enough, and is it time, according to my individual life plan that I made myself, to find a higher teaching? And as the masters say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But it requires you to be ready in your outer mind, where you are willing to look beyond the teaching you have right now, and the community and the guru, and reach for higher teaching, and just go into a neutral awareness, because the key to getting good intuition is neutrality, where you are just open. Is there a higher step for me? Am I ready to find that higher teaching? And if you can be neutral, it is going to come to you.